There's been a breakthrough on the immigration reform bill. That's good, I suppose, since we have to have some action on immigration reform. Now, I don't like the bill at all, and I feel like the people who talk about a breakthrough and want to act like this is an amazing thing are to some extent at least lying to you. But the part about this immigration reform bill and the breakthrough that I want to focus on is the border security. And so that's the big breakthrough, that they're going to be sending what sounds like about 40,000 additional border guards, which Cenk Uygur has estimated is one person for every 500 yards. So you can possibly yell to each other if you get bored while watching the border. They're also going to be building at least 700 miles of additional border fence. And that's the part we're going to focus on in this video. So as you might guess, building a 700-mile-long fence is an expensive proposition. And so yes, this is going to cost an extreme amount of money to up the border security. So let's talk about some of the previous efforts to build fences on the border. So for pedestrian fences, the price was averaged per mile between $400,000 and $15 million per mile, with an average of $3.9 million per mile, which is a crazy amount of money for what basically amounts to just one layer of fence to stop people from crossing. The vehicle fencing is a little bit cheaper for whatever reason, between $200,000 and $1.8 million per mile, for an average of $1 million per mile. So very expensive, these previous pedestrian and vehicle fences. Now understand that the fence that they're talking about building here is not the pedestrian fence, and it's not the vehicle fence. It's not a one-layer security system. It's going to be at the very least 2 layers of fencing with territory bought between them that will be patrolled by these border agents. So it's going to be extremely expensive to build, far more than these other fences, which were already crazy expensive. And understand that the construction of the fence is not the only expense. They also have to build the land. Now, how much does that cost? Well, we have a few ideas. They've previously had to purchase private property or at least get the rights to build the fences on them. So we have 2 cases here. The Nature Conservancy in South Texas was offered $114,000 to build a fence on their land. They eventually settled for $1 million. A developer in Brownsville, Texas, I have friends who live there, offered $233,000, ended up with $4.7 million. And that is with much shorter segments of fence that have already been built. How much is it going to cost to purchase the land, to build the fence, to patrol the fence for God knows how many years, if not decades? The cost boggles the mind. And understand that the people that are pushing for this, yes, there are some Democrats, but for the most part they're conservatives who, on every other day of the year, are very much worried about the national debt and the deficit and fiscal discipline, fiscal responsibility. But when it comes to keeping out brown people, the sky is the limit on how much they're going to pay. And if they could build the fence up to the sky, they would pay to build it that high. Now let's talk more generally about why it is that when talking about immigration reform, the thing that everybody seems to agree that we should have is more border agents and a bigger, more expensive, and more durable fence, possibly with drones all over it. Although, again, these are the people that are supposedly against drones being used for domestic surveillance. The reason that the drone is so popular and the reason that sending people to the border is so popular is because of old-fashioned xenophobia. It's the gift that keeps on giving. You tell the people, we've got these invaders that are illegally coming across the border, they're jumping over the fences we already have, and the idea that perpetuates from that is that these immigrants are criminals, that they're dangerous, that they might be terrorists, you can't trust them. So you get people on the border scared of what's going on. You tell people who don't live near the border what's going on there, and it leads to long-term xenophobia and distrust, if not hatred, of people coming from Central America, South America, and particularly Mexico. In addition, it leads people to worry more about outsiders in general, and that's something that America has had a strong history of, is worry about foreigners. We're an incredibly xenophobic country. Now, there are some others. In Europe, for instance, Spain to some extent has some xenophobia for people coming across from Morocco. Some areas of Eastern Europe are incredibly worried about Turkish immigration and things like that. And so this sort of immigration-based xenophobia is, I think, extremely scary, and I don't like seeing it played out here. Now, over 10 years ago, as an undergrad, I remember reading textbooks about how it's always politically popular to want to allocate more money to border security, but it's ultimately a futile effort. And yet 10 years later, we're still doing it, and we're still spending God knows how many millions or billions of dollars on it. And the reason is, when you build the fence a little bit higher, or you increase the security, it does not stop the demand for access to the United States. it will only drive up the cost of paying the coyotes or paying whatever it is to get across the border. You put more people on the border, they just figure out a time that those borders aren't being watched. You put a fence there, they figure out how to jump over it, or they tunnel underneath it. Now, we don't know exactly what's going to end up with this immigration bill because, of course, the Senate does need to consider it as well. But at this point, it's extremely worrisome. If anything passes, it seems like the only way it's going to pass is if the pathway to citizenship is insanely long and complicated to tread down, and we spend untold amounts of money on border security. Neither of those things should be the case. We should have a much more common sense path to citizenship and an understanding that if you want to stop people from coming across the border illegally, you only need to prosecute employers who give them jobs and thus incentive to come across the borders. It's not about putting walls up. It's not about putting walls around a prison. It's not about walling off access from wild animals and things like that. And it's no reason to encourage xenophobia.